Aloha, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Welcome to our first Careers in Southeast Asian Speaker Series. My name is Ariel. I am a graduate assistant at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, and I will be your moderator for today. This event is part of our Title VI National Resource Center initiative called Careers in Asian Pacific Affairs, which seeks to explore UH students to a range of careers in areas of national need. Join us today is Dr. Keith Benninger. Dr. Benninger is currently the Senior Technical Director for Climate Change for DT Global, a leading international development firm that designs and implements projects for bilateral aid agencies and multilateral financial institutions around the world. He previously worked on the climate change projects for several UN agencies, including the UNDP and UNEP. He has also worked on climate change projects and policies in dozens of countries. Dr. Benninger earned his Ph.D. in geography from the University of Hawai'i in 2014. His dissertation focused on the effects of post-authoritarian decentralization reforms on national park-based conservation in Indonesia, specifically at Kerinci Seblat National Park, Sumatra. He began his career as an Indonesianist and specialist in Southeast Asia and still considers the region to be his primary area of expertise, but is also a specialist in climate change adaptation in Pacific Island countries and UN-designated least developed countries. Thank you, Dr. Benninger, for joining us today. So I'd like to start by asking you if you could tell us a little bit about your current professional profile and how long have you been in this position?
Thanks, Ariel. First of all, I want to start off by expressing my gratitude to you and the Center for Southeast Asian Studies for inviting me to be with you today. This is always a real honor for me to be asked to do something like this, to contribute in some small way to, the professional academic development for people that are, just starting a journey, right? That are earlier in the journey than me. So I really am grateful for this opportunity. It's good to see old friends, and it's good to see make new friends as well. Anyway, just to get started, what's the question? Tell me the question again.
Oh, yeah. So if you could tell us a little bit about your current professional profile and then how long have you been in this position?
Sure. Well, my current job, I'm Senior Technical Director for Climate Change for a company called DT Global. And DT Global is a firm, kind of a mid-sized firm that works in the private sector, and we implement projects we're in development, international development. We implement projects for USAID, for the United Kingdom's Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, for the European Union, for AusAid, for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade New Zealand, and other development partners, multilateral institutions, and so forth. And I've been working for DT Global in this capacity for, I guess, about 15 months now, almost no more than that, almost a year and a half. Almost 18 months, which I see my PhD advisor, my beloved PhD advisor, is on the call. I'm sure that she's shocked that I've been able to hold a job for a year and a half, but I've been in this position for about 18 months and still going strong. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, thinking about careers in Southeast Asia, in what ways, can you talk a little bit in what ways your current position or even your past previous positions require knowledge of Southeast Asia?
Yeah, that's a good question. So so right now in my position, I have my remit, it's global. Yeah, so we're a global firm, and my job is to kind of advise on climate change issues global. That's my primary position, is to be a subject matter, a technical expert on climate change, on adaptation and finance. See, the regional knowledge on Southeast Asia and more specifically on Indonesia, is a bonus for my firm. And I use my background in Southeast Asian, studies and my understanding of Southeast Asia in a number of ways, pretty much every day, actually. So the first thing that I do is I'm a general topical specialist on Southeast Asia, kind of a, you might think of me as like an area studies pro on Southeast Asia. Yeah. So I provide advice on project development. So that's basically what my firm does. We implement projects, as I mentioned, and we have to bid on projects that like USAID or these other development partners tender out. Right. So it's a competitive landscape. And what my firm, what we have to do is when USAID or when the EU, they have a project that they want to implement in the health sector or in climate change or in infrastructure, they bid out a tender. So they have an idea of what they want. And my firm and a number of other firms, we write a bid about how we're going to, meet their development objectives. So with that in mind, I get called in on a lot of bids because I know a lot about the region. Yeah. So I get called in to provide advice on project development when we are implementing a project, on implementation, helping to understand the context, the way that things work, the history, the culture, etc. All of these things are really important in my job. Especially if you're working for an organization that values the context in which you're working. Not all companies do, as everyone on this call no doubt knows. But if I'm fortunate enough to work for a company that values kind of putting the local first, and having kind of a deep knowledge and training in an area where you don't just understand, but you feel, right? You feel the region. That's a very important thing. So the first thing I do is as a generalist. The second thing I do is what my colleagues in the business or in my firm call business development. Yeah, and so like I said, my firm implements projects for USAID and so forth. And so when there's a project related to environment or climate change in Southeast Asia that's out to bid, I have the opportunity to play some role in scoping that project out or the technical development of the project, right? So if and I've done that a lot recently because there's a lot of development projects in Southeast Asia. But we have a unit out of London that does work for the UK, does for what used to be UK Aid, now the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And they're a different division than my division in the US, but when they just recently submitted a proposal for a low carbon development initiative in Indonesia, right? A big project that's being sponsored by the UK government. And I get called in because I have a very deep, probably more than anybody in the firm almost, a deep understanding of Indonesia. Or if our colleagues in Australia want to bid a project on climate change in Laos or in Cambodia, for example, because of my background in those countries, working there or studying, I would get called in on those. But currently, one of the things that we're working on, and I'm the technical lead on this because it's US based, right? So USAID out of Indonesia they're putting together a new climate change adaptation project that they want to run in the cities of Indonesia in eight provinces out of the, I don't know how many provinces there are, like 37, I think now. They just had a round of Pemekaran. They just created some new provinces in Indonesia. Yeah. And so, we're at the scoping stage on that. And I was just in Jakarta for a couple of weeks. And it's my job to lead the technical development of that, right? So we get what's called, in this case, we have a request for information from USAID, and it's a scoping exercise. They have an idea of what they want to accomplish with this money that they're going to invest, that they're going to spend in Jakarta. what we're doing is we're positioning ourselves a bit on this project, and that's my job is to identify the partners that we're going to work with, to identify the methodology, like how we're going to achieve these broad, high-level objectives. And as you can imagine, a knowledge of Indonesia and a background working there, a network of working with local organizations, being able to speak the language, all of that is extremely useful, right? It's a big difference maker in terms for my company versus other companies to have that expertise on staff. So that's probably my primary the primary way that I use my background in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I also learned that you were involved in writing some of these climate policies for Timor-Leste, where I come from. I probably come across some of these documents that you were involved. So that's great that
well, don't hold that against me. when you're applying your Foucaultian analysis to the Timorese NAP, don't it's not my fault. No, I'm kidding, of course.
They're great. They're great.
Yeah.
So you're talking a lot about your knowledge of Southeast Asia and how that put you on edge. So could you talk a little bit about your Southeast Asia education background and how any aspects of this education help you in your current or past professional career?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ariel, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, I'm kind of an opportunist, in my educational and professional career. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I don't know how common it is. Yeah. But when I started off, I was living in Louisiana. I was a high school teacher, and this was in my early 20s, and I wanted to get out. I didn't really have an escape. And I just happened onto a job in Japan. I got accepted into a teaching program in Japan. And so I went over to Japan and spoke and learned Japanese and taught English there. I was very fortuitous to have that door open for me. But, during that time in Japan, my 2 years there, it's very expensive in Japan. What I found, since I was a school teacher, I had long breaks, and I found that it was actually cheaper for me to go off for like a month, including the airfare and everything, to go to the Philippines for a month and travel around, or to Cambodia for a month and travel around, than it was to just like sit in my apartment in Japan. Right? So I started to explore Southeast Asia as a money saving endeavor. But I very quickly learned a lot about Southeast Asia. I mean, if you're kind of a scholar at heart, your eyes and ears are always open, right? Based on that experience, I saw a lot of things that I'd never seen before, and I got very, very interested. And admittedly, there's some naivete associated with this because it was early on in my career. But I was very interested in development, right? And in particular, urban underdevelopment. I remember Dr. Stark will be able to relate to this, but back in 1999, I took a trip from Aranya Pretet to Poipet to Siem Reap, to see Angkor Wat. And that was 1999. And the road at that time was it took something like 7 hours to go about 150 kilometers. Yeah, you remember that. Yeah, the road I guess the road's better now, but it took a long time. And I remember riding on this heroic Isuzu pickup truck with extra leaf springs in the back of it. Yeah, and it was the way that it navigated this road. And along, you're in the bed of a pickup truck with 17 Cambodians. That's not an exaggeration, by the way. I mean, we're all study Southeast Asia. We know it's not an exaggeration, but you got a lot of time to think about things, right? And I was thinking about connectivity and road networks and commerce and again, there was some early career naivete to this, but I like, what would be the consequences, the impact of paving this road, right? What would that do? What processes would that trigger? I was very interested in those types of things and this kind of linear development model. Yeah. And I saw a lot of that firsthand, and it convinced me when I moved back to the United States that I wanted to study development. So I moved to Washington, D.C., and I got a master's in geography at George Washington, in international affairs at George Washington University. And it was at that time I was focusing on East Asia because I spoke Japanese. I did then. I don't speak Japanese very well now, but that was my focus. But it was only at George Washington that I started to get into geography, because the schools that I did my first master's and my bachelor's at were small liberal arts schools. And there was like one geography professor, if any. Yeah. And so, you learn like capitals and export crops and stuff like that. But it was only at George Washington University that I was actually taking classes on resource management, and political ecology, political economy types of things in geography. And I realized at that time, wow, this is a discipline that is very consistent with the way that my brain operates and the way that I have come to apprehend the world. Although I didn't get my master's there at GW in geography, it did put me on a trajectory into geography. So I got a job after I finished my master's here, and I say here because I'm in DC now, administering USAID projects in Cambodia. I was running a project in Cambodia and another one in Bangladesh on elections and electoral democracy and things like that. That was a real story. That was a real story, actually. That's could write a book about that experience. But very quickly after that, I did that for about 8 months, and then I got a Fulbright, kind of a postgraduate Fulbright to go to Malaysia. And so I moved over to Malaysia and learned some Malay. But I started to research on something that was interesting to me, and that was kind of the politics of national parks or protected area based conservation. And when I was in Malaysia, I had a lot of freedom because you got a Fulbright. I was associated with the University Kebangsaan Malaysia in Bangi. But I basically could do whatever I want. I took advantage of that to do, I think it's who is it? Is it Dr. Padway that talks about deep hanging out? I think it's Padway that yes it is. So I took advantage of that opportunity to kind of deep hang out in Malaysia. And when I finished that, I wanted to get a Ph.D. My dad was a college professor, so I had this dream about being a college professor myself. That's what I grew up with. Yeah. So I moved back to the United States, and eventually I decided to make my way over to Hawaii in the geography program. And that was thanks to he's an assistant dean now over in College of Social Sciences, I think, Dr. Ross Sutherland. Kind of bent over backwards to make it possible for me, somebody he'd never met before, to do my PhD there. I always be grateful for him for that. I came to UH, and I had it in my head, even though I had studied I had done this Fulbright in Malaysia. I always loved Cambodia. It just is. I mean, I love it. I think there are people on the call that understand that. And I had it in my head that I was going to do my PhD on something related to national park conservation and resource conflicts and governance and things like that. But like I said, I'm an opportunist and a pragmatist, probably above everything. And I realized very quickly that to learn Khmer, it was just gonna. It was going to be very difficult to do that. It was going to be easier for me to learn Indonesian, especially because I knew some Malay. I knew some Malay. And also, I met I was fortunate enough to make some friends from Indonesia in the geography department and get a job or get a little part-time gig that was funded by the Ford Foundation, I think, through the East West Center, through I can't remember who it was through, but it was to help Indonesian students that were on Ford fellowships to, kind of with the mechanics, the editing and so forth of their master's theses and their PhD theses. And I made friends doing that. And I learned a lot about Indonesia that way. But I also, one of the friends I made worked in the national park system in Indonesia. And it made it easy for me to get the research permits, and he introduced me to a site. He did a lot for me. He helped me a great deal. I don't think I would have ever been able to do my field work without Agung Nugroho, who he did his master's degree in geography a number of years ago. So, opportunistically, and I was able to do my work in Indonesia. I'm almost ashamed to say this, but I'm being honest. I'm not one of these people that is like, I went to Indonesia and I saw like a wayang kulit show and I decided I want to be a dalang, and I've been pursuing that dream for like 30 years. I'm not that guy, right? But I'm the guy that goes through the door, right? That opens and takes every advantage of it. Works very hard to make the most of an opportunity, and that's what I did in Indonesia. So and also, what the FLAS, I had some FLAS awards from UH, and Dr. Allen was always extremely helpful to me. I owe the world to her and the FLAS program. I was able to use that to every summer go over to Indonesian study Bahasa, and I learned Bahasa that way. So that's kind of how I got I got into it. It took me a long time to do my PhD. It took me like 8 years. And I think, if you ask Krishna, she'll tell you she wanted to get rid of me quicker than that. But what I kind of had a deliberate plan. I wanted to be what I think of as a geographer. So I wanted to take courses and learn across the spectrum from human geography to physical geography. I wanted to do science. I wanted to do I wanted to be able to be integrating, right, in my apprehension of a problem and my understanding of a problem. And I did that. It took me a long time. I tested a lot of theories, right? Well, I went through a million different drafts of like proposals for my PhD, and it's like, man, am I ever gonna get this? Am I ever gonna get? I was using SAC, and I was using I used phenomenology at one point. I was doing a good, and I didn't do that in my PhD, but I was thinking, wow, this phenomenology is interesting stuff. Why don't I do a study of whatever the phenomenological study of national parks in Indonesia? I did. So, I did a lot of stuff. And finally, I kind of got to political ecology, and I'm a Marxist. That's my training. I'm not a Foucaultian, or I don't do actor network theory. Marxism is kind of the way that I apprehend things. I got into decentralization. I got to know who the folks that would be on my committee, like Dr. Komura, who was wonderful. Yeah. Krishna, obviously, right? She just was like a mom to me. She took really good care of me and was extremely patient to me. She's an excellent advisor. And Kim Lowry, God rest his soul. He was a really important person to me. Lyndon Wester and Matt McGranahan. I got a chance to spend time with these people over the course of 8 years, and it really kind of shaped me quite a lot. And so, eventually I was able to go to the field, I got a Fulbright Hays. Unfortunately, it was the year that they killed the Hays, right? They unfunded the Hays Fellowship, the Fulbright Hays. And so that was when the Mellon Foundation stepped in and took up the slack and gave us money, right? To go over and do our field work. And then fortunately, when I was in the field, I won the Sumitra Fellowship from the U.S. Indo Society. And yeah, that's kind of how it worked. I may have given you way too much information, but you're giving me a platform to talk about myself, so it's on you. Right?
No, thank you for sharing that. You have a very rich experience on Southeast Asia, and you know, like you speak Malay and Bahasa. That's amazing. And also, like for your information, Ibu Chris is actually here as well, listening
I
to
know,
this.
I see her in the list of
Oh
participants
yeah,
there.
yeah. Okay, okay, awesome. Yeah, it's funny you brought up the political ecology, Foucauldian and Marx, because I work with Dr. Michael Fisher,
Mhm.
and then there was a point where he was like, "Oh, I thought you're a Marxist," and I said, "No, I think I'm leaning towards Foucauldian," and there's always that tension. But let's see. So speaking of your time at the UH, apart from the academic, did you participate in extracurricular activities uh, when you were in Manoa that you think were particularly helpful in building your professional profile?
Yeah, I was geography GSO rep, the graduate student organization rep, for a couple of years. I think it was a couple, yeah, like I was in the program for 8 years. It all runs together, right? So I might have been 2 months, it might have been 2 years, but I think I was a rep for 2 years. Yeah. And that was a pretty cool experience because the it gave me a lot of experience in like adjudicating grants or judging, evaluating grants. And they're just small grants, these travel research grants that GSO gives out. But I learned a lot about the process, and kind of some of the arbitrariness of grant making processes sometimes, and how hard it is, how a committee comes together and tries to judge the merits of something that they don't have any idea what's going on. But I also, at that time, this is a long time ago, so it's like when 2006, more than 15 years ago, so I can talk about this stuff now. But at that time, the GSO was kind of in disarray. Yeah. And I learned, and I've learned this over time, and I would say that this is important. I learned how kind of an individuals can affect the performance of an institution, but also how institutions can affect the performance of individuals. Yeah. So I think that that's all like Weber. I think Max Weber is Weber of Weber, however he's dead, right? It doesn't care how we say his name. But I think all of that is I think that that's really important to learn, is how institutions are constraining, but also how institutions are made up of people with different agendas and so forth. So I learned that from GSO. I had some firsthand knowledge of that, but and that has been very helpful. But the other thing that I did, I helped to start the geography club. And I don't know how helpful that's been in my career, but it's something that I've been proud of. I've always I always have wanted to create structures or create systems or and to help other people coming along the journey after me, and I've always endeavored to do that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So the work that you're currently doing, what do you find most rewarding about your job, and what are some of the greatest challenges you face in your daily work?
That's a good question too. So there's good and bad in my job, just like any job. I really like my job a lot. It's cool. I'm fortunate. I'm very lucky to have the job that I have. The one thing that I like is that I get to learn all the time. I learn a lot. I have a lot of freedom in my job as a technical expert. As a technical lead on things, but like I get called in to provide review and technical advice on lots and lots of different things. So earlier this week, I've been playing a role on advising on a bid that we're writing, a proposal that we're writing on climate resilient water and sanitation hygiene in Ethiopia, in the lowlands of Ethiopia. Yeah, and in my UN days, I did a little bit of work in Ethiopia, not that much, but I'm called in because the project is climate resilient. right? Climate resilient, that triggers call Keith, right? So, but it's all about water, sanitation, hygiene, which I know a little bit about, as a generalist, but it's very, very interesting learning about the political dynamics in this particular region and the way that, as a geographer, I'm interested in these things about how the environment shapes what they used to call it when I was coming up, possibilism. I don't know if that term is still used, but the way that the environment doesn't determine what the path is going to be, right? But it creates kind of a basket of possibilities for people, right? So I've always been interested in that, and I get to see it in action. And in this particular project, it's very focused on women and girls, right? And working on the problem of like open defecation, and problems like just providing menstrual care and products for young girls or young women in environments where there might be taboos or there might be cultural institutions that are constraining, right? And how do you approach these problems? How do you even apprehend the problem in the first place, right? How do you talk about it? But then how do you start to think about behavior change pathways and the technical aspects are very interesting to me, but also like the ethical aspects of all of this, right? Are quite interesting to me. So that's just one example. And I get to do that a lot, as much as I want, right? It's something that it's the work that I've always wanted to do. Yeah, it's not as romantic as I once thought it was when I was in that pup truck going across the road from Poipet to Siem Reap, in 1999. It's not as romantic, but I think nothing ever is. Yeah. But I really like the fact that I do what I've always wanted to do. In addition to that, I hold the pen on projects. And what I mean by that is I design interventions, I design projects, and I have a lot of freedom to do that, right? So, sometimes I lament the fact that I work for a for-profit company, right? Our job is to, extract surplus, right? I told you I'm a Marxist, to alienate people from their species being and so forth. But that fact notwithstanding, I have a lot of freedom to kind of bring to bear what I know and what I've experienced and my analytical capabilities on a particular problem. Yeah. And whether we win or lose is largely dependent on kind of my apprehension of the problem. And I really like that, right? I like in Indonesia, for example, I like to be able to orchestrate a situation or a process where I'm putting my colleagues that I've met, and I've worked with in the past in Indonesia that experience these issues firsthand, that know much more about them. I can orchestrate a situation where we're actually putting them in the lead of designing this project. I like being able to create a pathway for good people that do good work. I like working with people from all over the world. Some of the best people that I've ever met I'm working with right now, and it's very humbling, and I'm always learning from other people. I love that aspect of it. And I like being able to be at the table on high level discussions. I get asked a lot, sometimes back channel, to advise foreign governments on climate change policies and plans, and I really like that. That's a lot of fun. From the challenges side, I work in a different culture than I'm used to. Yeah, my culture is a culture of academia, the academy. Yeah, like I said, my father was a college professor, and I grew up in that. And I spent 8 years in the Department of Geography at UH. And I mean, I have tremendous respect for the academy. And I always thought that that I'd be a professor. It didn't go that way. But the culture that I'm in now is kind of an inside the Beltway DC culture, and it's very different than academia. That's a big challenge, right? I think that a lot of times, right, I get called in to provide technical advice and input on an analysis on something, but people expect me to turn it on like a light switch, right? It's like ask me that, oh, we're doing a project in Nepal and in the mountains about irrigation. Can you tell us what the climate change issues are? Like off the cuff, am I supposed to be? That's not how an academic operates, right? As you know, we want to be evidence based. I want to read for about 6 years, right? And then I'll answer your question. And the culture that I'm operating in right now doesn't exactly operate like that, right? So that there are a lot of challenges with that. Yeah.
Thank you. That's actually very helpful, especially for like someone who is also interested in going into like the field of development, learning about the difference between academia world and the NGO mentality that is a little different from the way we did things in school. Let's see. So my next question is a little bit more for some of the grad students like myself who are here today who would like to hear this, but what are 3 core skills do you think are most applicable for pursuing career focused on Southeast Asia?
Yeah,
or in general, really? But
okay. That's a good question. I want to step back a minute and just tell you about one more challenge I face kind of on a everyday basis. I often have to do things that I'm not very good at, in my job that are outside of, writing a 20-page peer review paper. I often have to do things that I don't have a long background in. I'm learning how to do those things, and we in the academy, we learn quickly, right? We specialize in learning quickly. So I'm able to kind of do it, but I'm outside of my comfort zone a lot. Now, to move on to the next question, the 3 core skills, I think if you're gonna be outside academia, right? If you're going to work outside of academia in Southeast Asia, I think it's good to have a technical specialization. Yeah, it's good to have a skill, whether that's climate change, whether that's being able to do irrigation work, or health, or you should have a theme that will help you get a job. It's difficult. I may be wrong on this perception, but I think it's difficult to get a job outside of academia as strictly as a area studies specialist.
Okay.
Right. So it's good to broaden yourself a little bit. Then I think that the second thing is I would say this is for every place, but since we're talking about Southeast Asia, we'll say Southeast Asia. I think it's very important to understand processes. Yeah, like bureaucracy, governance, budgeting, planning, legal systems. Right? How the countries are organized in vertically and horizontally. Right? So in Timor-Leste, for example, I mean, all about Timor-Leste, but if you want to get anything done, any real analysis done there, if you want to get to the root of problems, you have to understand how these institutions work, right? You have to understand how laws are made, what are the processes and so forth. So I think basically having when I was in high school, we took civics and free enterprise in 9th grade. Yeah. I don't know in Hawaii, I think it's in the 10th grade, but having like a civics understanding of how laws are made and how the different, in Indonesia, how the national governments and the provinces and the kabupatens are related to one another, right? In Cambodia, how the process of decentralization has manifested itself, right, through the National Committee for Democratic Decentralization, or like that. All of these things are really, really important, and having an understanding of like public policy and budgeting and so forth. It's quite boring, but I mean, in my opinion anyway. But like the first thing that I want to know now when I'm going to work in a new country is I want to know how the government is structured horizontally, vertically, right? I want to know what the Constitution looks like, how the separation of powers and so forth. I want to know how that stuff works, or theoretically how it's supposed to work. Yeah. So that's the second thing, like understanding processes. And then I guess the third thing, I mean, you mentioned Micah, he's a close friend of mine. I would say the other thing is the last thing is to like be like Micah, right? Or be like Mary, Dr. Mary in geography. I'm not going to try and say Mary's last name because it's been like 4 years since I've said it and I'm out of practice. Or, be like Dr. Stark or Krishna, like find people that you admire and the way that they do their jobs. And watch that, watch the behaviors and try to take a little bit of a piece of that, be able to take a little piece of that and roll that into what you do and how you do your work. That's a really important skill. That's a skill to be able to recognize like the habits of people that are good at what they do. And all of those people are really good at what they do, and yeah, just admire people. Yeah. I think that's a really important skill to have. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So that brings us to our last question for today before we turn to the audience. What concrete recommendations would you give to current students who might be interested in pursuing career focus on Southeast Asia within or beyond the government, education, business, and nonprofit organization?
I think that I mean, this isn't really the advice for folks that are from Southeast Asia because you're from there. But if you're from the American side, or I think go there, right? Go as much as possible. So I've told people in the past that like if I told you I started off this conversation talking about being an opportunist, right? When a door opens up, I go through it. Or at least I used to earlier in my career. And I think that's why I'm where I am right now, why I have kind of the freedoms that I have now, is, if somebody asks you if you can do something, somebody asked me one time, hey, will you move over to Thailand and work for a year on this climate change project? And like, for me, the answer is, yes. The answer to that question, if you don't have ties or constraints that are keeping you from doing it, the answer is always yes, unequivocally. Yeah, is go and do stuff and take advantage of these opportunities because they always lead to additional opportunities, right? If you go outside of your comfort zone a little bit, then it's going to pay off. And related to that, the answer is always yes. And I probably shouldn't say this because, online being recorded, right? But if somebody asks you if you know how to do something, I mean, there are obviously limits to this, but my answer is usually yes, right? So unless do you know how, Dr. Bettinger, do you know how to do a heart transplant? I'm not going to say yes to that, right? I mean, on people anyway, right? Or Dr. Bettinger, do you know how to? Can you build a suspension bridge across the from Java to Sumatra? No, I cannot. I can't do that, right? But somebody asked me like something that I've never done before, but maybe I've seen it done, or I can look it up online, right? I know that there are examples of how to do this. Then my answer traditionally in the past has been, yeah, I can do that, right? And what that normally, what normally happens is I get myself into a situation where I have to work my posterior off to catch up, to remediate myself, but I'm not afraid to do that. Yeah. So, can you, Yeah, I mean, I could give you a lot of examples of this, but you know, we are trained at learning how to do things. We're trained at analysis. We're trained at parsing through lots and lots and lots of data and information and assimilating that and drawing conclusions. And like based on that, based on my academic training, I kind of feel like there are a lot of tasks out there that I can learn how to do very quickly. And so, you know, there have been many, many circumstances in my career, especially consulting, when somebody's reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you do this?" And I kind of, you know, I don't lie. I don't say that I've never done it before. Right. But I can probably figure it out, you know, so I think you have to be brave to do that. Fortunately for me, the results are always, I mean, you know, always pretty good. If you're willing to work, you know, if you're deficient at something, you're willing to work like 18 hours to remediate yourself a day, then you're going to be all right, I think. But, you know, don't be afraid to go outside your comfort zone, both in terms of geography and in terms of competency, I think. Right. You push the envelope a little bit. Then yeah, figure out how to do stuff. And then I would say have a backup plan, right? Have a backup plan. If what you want to do, what you see yourself doing doesn't pan out, you need to be able to escape, right? So like I said, I always wanted to be a university professor, and I wanted to be a university professor when I finished my Ph.D. And I went for about 2 years, I went through this ringer of trying to find a job. I got some interviews online, but I probably applied for 25 jobs over the course of 2 years. I think some people do more than that. And I had like 4 interviews over the course, 4 interviews online, not in person. I didn't get flown any place. And I mean, I was getting letters from universities said, "Hey, you know, great publications, you know, you look really good." But we had 200 people applying for this job, right? 200 people with PhDs, and some of them were already an associate professor someplace trying to move laterally and bringing money, you know. Or it's just a really difficult environment out there to get a job as a professor. At least it was when in 2014. I can't imagine it's any better now, because you know you've got all these professors that are retiring and they're not being replaced. They're being replaced by lecturers. Yeah. So I think that having a backup plan. I mean, while I was doing that, I was also, fortunately, you know, I mentioned Cam earlier. I mean, he's one of the most important people in my life and in my trajectory. And I mean, I miss him dearly, but he got me into like the trajectory that I'm on now. He opened a door for me. And so I ran through that door basically. Yeah. And it didn't take me very long to be disabused of the fantasy of being a university professor, right? I mean, kind of disappointing, but I just realized after getting these letters, you know, that this is kind of a fool's errand for me anyway. I once got a letter from, this was funny. I got a letter from Clark. I applied for a position in the geography department at Clark one time. And I got back a Word document that was a form letter and didn't even have my name in it. Right? They sent everybody the form letter. They had some sort of mess up, you know, yeah, it's horrible. But Miriam, I had a great time because it was a Word document, and I made all kinds of rejection letters. I made a rejection letter for Genghis Khan. I made a rejection letter for Donald Trump. I sent with Genghis Khan. Thank you, Genghis Khan, for applying for a position at our university. I mean, it was a form letter. But, you know, given that you are genetically related to 1/4 of the humans in Boston, right? We can't hire you because it would be perceived as nepotism, right? So, I mean, I just had a good time writing stupid, corny rejection letters to various historical figures from Clark University, posted them on my Facebook. But I mean, it was a real grind. And you know, I feel for folks that don't have an escape from that, right? I personally, I think that if it's not working out for you, you got to go. You got to be honest with yourself. You know, you've got to go find something else to do. So don't focus on one thing, because there's a lot of cool stuff to do. You know, and really, what I used to tell my students when I was teaching at the community colleges or at UH, when I had the chance to do that. One of the things I tell them in the first lecture is, you know, you think about it, like for all of us, we were really privileged at this moment in history in that we have some agency, some control over what we do for a living, right? And maybe for some of it's not too much agency, but if you are getting a PhD, right, that's an incredible gift that you have that has converged upon you, where, you know, you can do what you want to do. And you can't take that gift for granted, right? You can't look that gift horse in the mouth and get too focused on one thing, right? If the world sends you in a different direction, I think you have to accept that and be thankful for it and find a good in that, right? So that's a recommendation that I would give to anybody that's a PhD student or a master's student, you know.
Thank you, Dr. Benninger, for sharing this very, very useful and important insights with us. So I'm going to go directly to the Q&A because we have a couple of really, really excellent questions. The first one is from Olivia. Olivia says, do you have advice on building a PhD project that involves transferable / professional development skills, or advice on how to articulate those skills to non-academics?
Okay, so I'm trying to find this in the chat. Olivia, thanks for the question. Is it in the webinar chat, this question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
let's see.
The one from 3:38 p.m.
3:38 p.m. Mine, it's giving me the times in Eastern.
Yes, right. Sorry.
Olivia's question is, do you have any advice on building a PhD project that involves transferable professional development skills, or advice on how to articulate those skills to non-academics? Do I have, that's a really good question, Olivia. PhD project that involves transferable professional development skills. Okay, so one thing that I would suggest there is, I mean, I think that there's a lot of people on this call and in Center for Southeast Asian Studies that might give you better advice than me. But if you're looking for a field work or a study for your PhD that's going to help you with professional development skills, evaluate development projects, right? Figure out some sort of research question that advances a theoretical framework, but you should look at case studies, yeah, and because that's very much in demand, right? And now, in fact, in USAID, there's been kind of a turn towards the scholarly, yeah, and USAID is hiring lots of people with research skills. I saw in their they have different strategies and policies. I was reading their strategy for local capacity development the other day, and it's very clear that whoever wrote that thing did their PhD with actor network theory. It's all over the USAID strategy, and it's pretty cool to be able to tease that out, right? But I would say, yeah, do something where you're looking at development projects, right? How USAID or the World Bank, everybody loves to pick on the World Bank, right? That's been sport for years for Saunders Hall, right? So pick on the World Bank and or USAID and look at how they apprehend a problem, first of all, and how they try to solve that problem. Yeah, and that's very, very useful. And the caveat there is that there are a lot of studies like this. So you have to find your angle, right? You have to find your niche, but what you're doing that's a little bit different from everybody else. And you can use that as an entry point to kind of define your career. But I would say whatever you do, that's one approach, is to look at concrete examples, because you'll learn all about the business that way. You'll learn about what works, what doesn't work, and that gives you a very tangible technical skill, a skill set that you can develop that skill set without actually having to be, get a master's degree in whatever that is. I think that's good. And advice on how to articulate those skills to non-academics. That's something I struggle with every day. But I think it's an acquired skill, right? And I think one thing you can do is listen to the way that people that don't have an academic background describe the problems that we try to describe with a Foucaultian or a Marxist framework, right? So you'll hear people say stuff like, and this is in every language, like the rich get richer and the poor get poor. That's something that my grandma said, right? And people have been saying that for generations. They say it in, they say it in Indonesian, makin kaya, makin miskin, people say these things, and that's like das Kapital, right? In a little, in a little I don't know if you call it proverb, an expression. The rich get richer, the poor get poor. Same shit, different day. Excuse my language, right? But that's about alienation from your species being, to put it in archaic Marxist terms. So I think that if you listen to how non-academic folks describe problems, then that helps you a lot. But it will also help you to identify entry points where you can maybe add a little bit of sophistication to that, right? Without, and and this is hard to get around, but you've got to soft pedal it sometimes. You gotta learn soft touch. Yeah. Like don't talk to people like you're like more than they do about a particular phenomenon. When in many cases you do. You're right. Your sophistication of understanding is significantly deeper than other folks, but you kind of have to learn how to disguise that. Yeah, especially for folks that are at a higher pay grade than you. But I hope that was useful. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about this question more. It's a really excellent question. Yeah.
All right. Our next question, I'm sure you can see it as well, but I'm gonna read it for other people in the audience as well. This question is from Lian. Many Western academic institutions have given insufficient attention to Southeast Asian studies in comparison to East Asia or other regional challenges. What is the most difficult aspect of your job, and what is the asset as well?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that a lot of that maybe, and this is, I'm just hypothesizing here, but a lot of that maybe has to do with kind of what perceived strategic importance of different areas, right? So the East Asia has been perceived for a long time as being more strategically important, and so there's more, there's just more attention to it. I think Southeast Asia is becoming recognized as a strategic crossroads, right? In like great power contestation. Yeah, but it's also important in and of itself. I think now we live in a much more connected world, and more and more people are able to more easily see and access kind of this tremendous cultural and linguistic diversity and beauty that draws a lot of us to study from the outside anyway, to study the region. The most difficult aspect of my job is we don't really work a lot in East Asia. So there's not, I don't have to defend the region from I don't have to justify, right, a focus on the region. The most difficult part of it is honestly, I don't get into the technical depth that I want to get into in terms of like problem analysis and problem solving. And I'll give you an example. What I've been working on today, pulling my hair out about, is I'm writing a USAID proposal for Kosovo. which is it's not, obviously it's not Southeast Asia, but it's what my company has decided to prioritize, right? We wanted to go after a project in Kosovo because we have a history there. And it's a climate change adaptation project. So I am holding the pen, and you know, I approach this task as an academic does, by getting deep into it. You know, I was able to go over to Kosovo and do some stakeholder consultations, right? Some what we would call key informant interview types of things. You know, what I'm responsible for in this proposal, I get about 6 pages to describe, right, this very complex issue about climate change adaptation and governance and finance and so forth. 6 pages to describe the problem and to describe a reasonably sophisticated understanding of the problem, and also a technical solution, right? Well, you know how it is. I mean, when you write your dissertation, mine was like 450 pages, I think, something like that, right? We're not known for our succinctness in academia. And I mean, you get so excited about your depth of understanding, and if somebody asks you a question about, you know, tell me about how should we address this problem, you naturally think, I want to tell you the whole story here so that you appreciate it. Yeah. And I don't get to do that ever. Yeah. And what I have to do is I have to economize, and I spend a lot of my time trying to balance like elegance and economy of explanation versus, like, you know, clarity and meaningfulness. So I would say that's the most difficult aspect. The asset there is being a good writer. You know, as academics, we get to write a lot and we get to read a lot, and that's how you become a good writer, I think, is and so that's a big asset. Yeah.
Right. The next question comes from Book Krishna. Very nice to hear your update, Pete. Can you share your quote unquote story from the field presentation?
Well, Krishna, if I did told you my best one, you'd probably take my PhD away from me, right? You go to the library and rip it out of the stacks there. No, I kid. I guess my best story was when I was in the field. I did my field work on Sumatra, and I was based in a town called Sungai Penuh. One day I woke up with I was set to go out. I had a motorcycle and I would use that to travel to villages all around. I mean, that was a lot of fun. Sometimes I describe like my PhD field work as an excuse just to ride a motorcycle around, you know, the Bukit Barisan Mountains on Sumatra. That's not what it was, but I had a good time doing that. But I was set to go out and do to villages for about 2 weeks one day. And I woke up with this just terrible pain in my gut. It's just excruciating, and not like bad satay pain, right? You know, it was just terrible. And it turns out I had appendicitis, right? So the getting myself from like medevacing myself basically from you know, relatively rural Sumatra to Jogja, where you know, where I felt most comfortable having surgery done on myself. That was a real ordeal. I mean, I remember going to the doctor in Sungai Penuh, and you know, I'm not trying to malign my field site because I love Sungai Penuh, I love Sumatra, but anybody that's been there knows that there are some, you know, there are some issues. Yeah. So I had actually been to before I had my appendix issue, I had been taken to the hospital to visit somebody that I didn't know, but that was unfortunately on their deathbed, and their family had decided that the one thing that would make this person's passing, you know, great, would be to meet a bule, right? A foreigner. So I got taken to the hospital by these people that I had seen in passing on the street, that saw me one day and said, "Oh, hey, let's go." you know, they took me to the hospital and brought me into this room with this person that was, you know, making their transition. That experience in the hospital was enough for me to decide that I did not want to have my body opened up, my appendix removed in that hospital, right? I just was not going to have that happen. So I went to this morning when my gut started to act up, I ended up at the doctor's office, and the doctor told me that I had appendicitis. She thought I had appendicitis, and I said, "Oh," and I said, "Am I gonna die, doc? Because you know I joke about everything, even having appendicitis." And she looked at me and she said, maybe you will." that brought me down to earth pretty quick. And then she said, "You know, but we can do the surgery here in the hospital. We have a hospital in town." And I just didn't want to be, you know, I didn't want to like disrespect this profession and this place, but I said, you know, let's not get carried away, doc. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. So I got on my bike and I mean, with like a pulsating appendix, you know, and I rode. It took me like 7 or 8 hours to ride on my motorcycle up to Padang, which is that's the access point for Sungai Penuh. That's where the airport is. So I got on an airplane. I flew over to Jogja and had my appendix taken out, and it was a great experience, you know. But that was one of my that's probably the best story. I actually tried to, because you know, anyone that knows me knows that I'm weird. And I was in Jogja, and Jogjakarta has the silver district, right, where all the silver makers are. And I thought, as I was sitting in there recovering from getting my appendix taken out, I had asked the doctor to keep my appendix, and he was a little bit taken aback by my request. I wanted to keep it, and but he couldn't see any reason not to grant my request. So he put it in like a jar of formaldehyde, and I had my appendix. And I thought, you know what, there's one thing that no other human being on this planet has ever done, and that's to get their appendix plated in silver. Yeah. And so I took my appendix to Kota Gede, to the silver district there, with the idea that, let me see if I can get somebody, one of these silversmiths, to silver plate my appendix, and I can wear it around my, I can wear it like on a chain. So that was a really interesting experience, and it tested my Indonesian, to ask this. So I went to like 4 different silversmiths, and I would walk into the silversmiths, and the first one I asked, I told them what I wanted, and they didn't quite understand because this was a really weird question. And I showed them my appendix, and they kicked me out of the shop. And then I went into the second silver shop, and I learned that I need to be delicate about this. So I prefaced everything I said by, listen, I'm not messing with you, and this is going to sound really weird, but I got my appendix here, and I'm wondering if you've got like a big vat of silver back there in the back of the shop that you could just dip it in there. And so I went in the second silversmith and explained it to them, and they kicked me out too. And then I went into the third shop, and they kicked me out. And then I went into the fourth shop, the fourth silversmith, and this guy grabbed the jar with my appendix in it, and he started looking at it like this, and and I knew I had my guy. Right. I knew I had my guy, because he was trying to figure out he was like me. He was trying to figure out how am I going to do this? And he thought for about 5 minutes. He said to me in Indonesian, he said, yeah, I think I can do this. But what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to put your appendix on the roof for a day, like dendeng. Yeah, like you dry meat, and let it dry out. And then we'll dip it and we'll see what we can do. And unfortunately, I didn't have a day. I had to go back to Sungai Penuh. I had a flight booked, so I went to Adi Sucipto Airport, and and I had my appendix with me. And anybody that's ever been through Adi Sucipto Airport knows that you could take a tank through the metal detector if you wanted to, right? You could take a MX MERV missile through the metal detector at Adi Sucipto and not have any problem. But I just knew, given my luck, that if I tried to take my appendix through, that's the day that they were going to search me. That's the day that they would choose to search me. And at that point, my Indonesian was not sufficient enough. It wasn't good enough for me to explain why I would have a human organ in my backpack, right? I wasn't going to be able to explain that away. So unfortunately, my appendix met an unceremonious end. I threw it in the garbage there at Adi Sucipto Airport. It's somewhere in Bantul in the landfill, I guess. But I guess that's my best field story. My best field story. It doesn't have any kind of academic redeeming qualities or characteristics, but that's it. Yeah.
Wow, thank you for sharing very interesting story from your field, Dr. Wenger. All right, so the next question comes from a member of the audience, and they ask, what are the opportunities in development or UN adjacent careers for those that want to specialize in cartography or GIS at the master's level and are interested in working in Southeast Asia and have working proficiency in Bahasa?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that there's a lot. Yeah. One thing though to bear in mind about GIS is that it's in demand, but GIS folks are trained all over the place, right? So it's in demand, but it's not a skill. It's not a rare skill set. So there are lots of folks that can do GIS. Yeah. So I would say that like my path in the UN, I never worked I never had one of those blue passports, unfortunately, right? I was always a consultant for the UN. So as a hired hand for the UN. What I think is on GIS, if you have a working proficiency with Bahasa, there's a lot of Indonesians that are really, really good at GIS that in most cases, the preference would be to hire somebody that is actually Indonesian. I assume if there's a working proficiency in Bahasa, that means you're not Indonesian. So most of those jobs are probably going to be taken by Indonesians that have those skills. Like UGM, Gajah Mada University churns out people that are good, really, really good in GIS. So with that said, I think that, and it's hard to break into the UN, but I think once you're in, you're in. So the hardest thing about the UN is to get into their they do everything. They have this like automated system, and you have to submit your CV to that and fill out all their it takes a long time to fill that stuff out. You should also, but do it with the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, and do it with with whoever you can. But I think that if you are able to meet people that work in Indonesia, that work for the UN on projects and are responsible for doing the hiring and spend a little bit of time with them or work with them, that helps a lot, right? So yeah, the UN has their choice of consultants, and they hire a lot of consultants. But if like the person that's responsible for the project in Indonesia, or in my case, it was Timor-Leste, Kyrgyz Republic, or wherever, if they know you, and then you're much more likely, you're a known quantity, and that's just kind of how the world works. So I don't know how useful that advice is to you. I mean, it's tough what you're asking, but that would be the way to do it. You got to have some way to distinguish yourself, to cut through the noise, yeah, to get a job like that. And you got to have an end to get that kind of job. So don't limit yourself to that. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. The next question comes from Makibi. Thank you for sharing your experience. Sometimes students/early career researchers of area studies wonder how to keep balance of position as a generalist and specialist? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I might not be the best guy to ask because it took me 8 years to get my PhD, right? So my advice is going to be spend the time to develop the specialization, either through kind of formal channels or by going out in the field and developing the skill, right? So a lot of times all it takes, I mean, you don't have to have the letters behind your name. You don't have to have a master's degree or in water and sanitation hygiene. You just have to have enough field exposure in that particular, technical discipline, field experience, knowing how things work, how processes work and things like that, and what's successful, what interventions are successful, what doesn't work, what are the determinants of success, and so forth. That helps a lot, and the way that you get that is from like direct experience. So I think that you have to make a commitment to developing the technical expertise. It's hard to do it, but you have to do it. And sometimes it's going to sidetrack you for a year or 2 years or so, right? Sometimes you're not going to have a linear track to your objective. But if you want to do both, I don't think you can shortcut it.
All right. Next question comes from Pindarik, and I think you talked a little bit about it earlier too. But Pin asks, I would like to learn from your insights what kinds of classes, extracurricular activities, programs that you think is important or recommend, suggest at the UH institutions here, maybe institutions here at the UH to develop and support students to become Southeast Asianists, or would be integral to their career development in Southeast Asia.
Thanks, Ben, for the question. That's a good question. I think a lot of it depends on you. So you're fortunate enough to be going to UH, which is it's a good school, and it's got lots and lots of things that you can do, right? So me personally, I did a lot of GIS. Yeah. I wouldn't say that I'm a GIS specialist, but I did a lot of GIS. I did some cartography because I'm a geographer and I was interested in those things. And that wasn't my primary skill, right? I'm a political ecologist. But though, I guess I took 6 or 7 GIS and geospatial analysis and cartography classes. And I think that has helped me a lot in my career to have done that. I don't know. I think that so pick something that maybe works for you. Like I think taking archaeology classes or taking classes in econ. Another thing I would suggest is women's studies, right? Or now I think that the American Studies department at UH has this profile as well, but there's a very, very strong demand and a need in my work for expertise in what we call GESI or GEDSI, gender equity and social inclusion, gender equity, disability and social inclusion. So being able to apply a gender, what they call in my industry, a gender lens to phenomena and how to address phenomena, that's really important. So if you can get really good at that, right, gender lens, feminist analysis of things, and even you can extend that to like a statistical analysis, right? Learning how to do monitoring and evaluation with a gender lens, with disaggregate things, disaggregate a data set in such a way that you were able to tease out more specific questions, right? So how are women between the ages of 13 and 18 being affected by this particular phenomenon, right? That's a really useful skill to have. Yeah. I hope that helps. I think that's really important for like having a gender lens in being a Southeast Asianist but not just gender, to understand kind of marginalizing dynamics, because there are, there are a lot of marginalized people in Southeast Asia, ethnically or through gender, the recent migrants to city and so forth. Kind of having an understanding of those dynamics helps quite a bit. I think that that's very important.
All right, we have one last question before we conclude our speaker series for today. But since this speaker series is focuses on careers and Southeast Asian studies, Dr. Benninger, so could you give us some list of take home points of advice, like something that you think, like this is what you should think of when you sleep tonight?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking from my perspective, right? So I don't,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
not the law. Yeah, it's just kind of how from my perspective, I think, be flexible about your, you have a lot of agency, and that's something to be grateful for, but you don't have complete agency over your path, right? It's kind of like this structuration process, yeah, that you go through with your life. So I don't be afraid of, like I said earlier, don't be afraid of pushing the envelope a little bit, right? Operating outside your comfort zone, because I think a lot of people don't do that. Yeah. And if you're willing to do that, if you kind of have, if you're willing to fail a little bit, because you're not going to fail with your life. Nobody on this call, nobody that's doing a PhD is a life failure, right? You just don't do that. But you may have a setback, but it's a learning experience. So don't be afraid to operate outside your comfort zone and do things that are not native to you, to kind of expand yourself a little bit. We live in a pretty competitive world, and it's globally competitive. It's not just like nationally competitive; it's globally competitive. So you have to be, able to be flexible. I think that's a really important thing. And read all the time, right? Learn stuff all the time. Yeah, learn stuff all the time. But get yourself in situations where you can learn.
All right, thank you, Dr. Benninger. And that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much again for our speaker and to all of the audience who participated and asked excellent questions today. Yeah, and have a good rest of your evening and day, wherever you are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's been wonderful. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah. And Ariel, last thing, I mean, let me put my I'm going to put my email address in the chat in case anybody has any.
Sure.
I should have done that earlier. But I'll put 2 email addresses in here in case you want to follow up. Anybody wants to follow up. I'm happy to be contacted. Yeah, there are a couple of my email addresses.
All right, I'll try to copy this and.
Oh, that's just a host and panelist. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I guess you'll have to broadcast that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just keithb@hawaii.edu is one of them, and you can give them my professional email address. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I put both emails in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some people still here. All right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop the recording.